Love and Friendship by Jane Austen, Part 2. Letter 11, Laura in continuation. I have a relation in Scotland, said Sophia to me as we left London, who I am certain would not hesitate in receiving me. Shall I order the boy to drive there? Said I, but instantly recollecting myself, exclaimed, Alas, I fear it will be too long a journey for the horses. Unwilling, however, to act only from my own inadequate knowledge of the strength and abilities of horses, I consulted the postilion who was initially of opinion concerning the affairs. We therefore determined to change horses at the next town and the travel post the remainder of the journey. When we arrived at last inn we were to stop at, which was but a few miles from the horses of Sophia's relation, unwilling to intruct our society on him unexpected and unthought of, we wrote a very elegant and well-penned note to him containing an account of our destitute and melancholy situation, and of our intention to spend some month with him in Scotland. As soon as we had dispatched this letter, we immediately prepared to follow it in person, and were stepped into the carriage from that purpose when our attention was attracted by the entrance of a current coach and forth into the inn-yard. A gentleman considerably advanced in year descended from it. At his first appearance, my sensibility was wonderfully affected, and ere I had gazed at him a second time, an instinctive sympathy whispered to my heart that he was my grandfather. Convinced that I could not be mistaken in my conjecture, I instantly sprang from the carriage I had just seen, and following the venerable stranger into the room he had been shown, I threw myself on my knee before him and besought him to acknowledge me as his grandchild. He started, and having attentively examined my features, raised me from ground and throwing his grandfatherly arms around my neck, exclaimed, Acknowledge thee? Yes, dear, resemblance of my Lorena and Lorena's daughter, sweet imagine of Collidia and my Collidia's mother, I do acknowledge thee as the daughter of the one of the granddaughter of the other. While he was thus gently embarrassing me, Sophia, astonished at my precipitate departure, entered the room in search of me. No sooner had she caught the eye of the venerable peer than he exclaimed with every mark of astonishment, An other granddaughter? Yes, I see you are the daughter of my Lorena's eldest girl. Your resemblance to the beauteous Matilda sufficiently claims it. Oh, replied Sophia, when I first beheld you, the instinct of nature whispered me that we were in some degree related. But whether grandfathers or grandmothers, I could not pretend to determine. He folded her in his arms, and whilst they were tenderly embarrassing, the door of the apartment opened and a most beautiful young man appeared. One perceiving him Lord Clare started and returning back a few paces with unlifted hands at another grandchild. What an unexpected happiness in this, to discover in the space of 3 minutes as many of descendants. This I am certain is Philipender, the son of the Loriana's third girl, the amiable Brita. There wants now but the presence of Gustavus to complete the union of my Lorina's grandchildren. And here he is, said a graceful youth who that instant entered the room. Here is the Gustav you desire to see. I am the son of Agatha, your Lorina's fourth and youngest daughter. I see you are indeed, replied Lord St. Clare. But tell me, continued he, looking fearfully towards the door, tell me, have I any other grandchildren in the house? None, my lord. Then I will provide for you all without further delay. Here are 4 banknotes of $50 each. Take them, and remember I have done the duty of a grandfather. He instantly left the room and immediately afterwards the house. Oh dear Laura. Letter 11. Letter the 12th, Laura, in continuation. You may imagine how greatly we were surprised by the sudden departure of Lord St. Clare. Ignorable grandsire, exclaimed Sophia. Unworthy grandfather, said I instantly faint in each other's arm. How long we remained in this situation I know not, but when we recovered we found ourselves alone without either Gustav or Philipender or the banknotes. As we were deploring our unhappy fate, the door of the apartment opened and MacDonald was announced. He was Sophia's cousin. The haste with which he came to our relief as soon after the receipt of our note spoke so greatly in his favor that I hesitated not to pronounce him at first sight a tender and sympathetic friend. Alas, he little deserved the name, for though he told us that he was much concerned at our misfortunes, yet by his own accounts it appeared that the pursuer of them had neither drawn from him a single sign, nor introduced him to bestow one course on our vindictive stars. He told Sophia that his daughter depended on her returning with him to MacDonald Hall, and that as his cousin's friend he should be happy to see me there also. To MacDonald Hall, therefore, we went and were received with great kindness by Janetta, the daughter of MacDonald and the mistress of the mansion. Janetta was then only 15, naturally well disposed, endowed with a respectable heart and a sympathetic disposition. She might had these amiable qualities have been an oriental to human nature, but unfortunately her father possessed not a soul sufficiently exalted to admire, so promising to her disposition, and had endeavored by every means on his power to prevent it increasing with her years. He had actually so far astonished the natural noble sensibility of her heart as to prevail on her to accept an offer from a young man of his discommendation. They were to be married in a few months, and Grama was the house when we arrived. We soon saw to his character. We were just such a man as one might have expected to be the choice. They said he was sensible, well informed, and agreeable. We did not pretend to judge of such trifles. But as we were convinced he had no soul, that he had never read the sorrows of Werther, and that his hair bore not the least resemblance to a Brent, we were certain that Janetta could feel no affection for him, or at least that she ought to feel none. The very circumstances of his being her father's choice too was so much in his disfavor, that had he been deserving her every in very in every other respect, yet that of itself ought to have been a sufficient reason in the eyes of Janetta for rejecting him. These considerations we were determined to represent to her in their proper light, and not to of meeting with the desired success from one naturally so well disposed, whose error in the affair had only arisen from a want of proper confidence in her own opinion, and a suitable contempt of her father's. We found her indeed all that our warmest wishes could have hoped for. We had no difficulty to convince her that it was impossible she could love Graham, or that it was her duty to disobey her father. The only thing at which she rather seemed to hesitate was our assertion that she must be attached to some other person. For some time she persevered in declaring that she knew no other young man for whom she had the smallest affection. But upon explaining the impossibilities of such a thing, she said that she believed she did like Captain McCrinney better than anyone she knew besides. This confession satisfied us, and after having enumerated the good qualities of McHenry, as accused her that she was violently in love with him, we desired to know whether he had ever in any wise declared his affection to her. So far from having ever declared it, I have no reason to imagine that he has ever felt any of me, said Janetta. That he certainly adores you, replied Sophia. There can be no doubt the attachment must be reciprocal. Did he never gaze on you with admiration, suddenly press your hand, drop an involuntary tears, and leave the room abruptly? Never, replied she, that I remember. He has always left the room indeed when his visit has been ended, but has never gone away practically abrupted or without making a bow. Indeed, my love, said I, you must be mistaken, for it is absolutely impossible that he should ever have left you but with confusion, despair, and persecution. Consider but for a moment, Janita, and you must be convinced how absurd it is to suppose that he could ever make a bow or behave like any other person. Having settled this point to our satisfaction, the next we took into consideration was to determine in what manner we should inform McKenna of the favorable opinions any time entered of him. We at length agreed to acquaint him with it by an anonymous letter which Sophia drew up in the following manner. O happy lover of the beautiful Janetta, O amiable possessor of her heart, whose hand is designed destined to another. Why do you thus declare confession of your attachment to the amiable object of it? Oh, consider that a few weeks will at once put an end to every flattering hope that you may be. But in but uniting the unfortunate victim of her father's cruelty to the execrable and detested Graham. Alas, why do you thus so cruelly conceive at the projected miseries of her and of yourself by declining to communicate that scheme which had doubtless long possessed your imagination? A secret union will at once secure the felicity of both. The amiable McKenna, whose modesty, as he afterward accused us, had been the only reason of his having so long concealed the violence of his affection for Janita, on receiving this billet flow on the wings of love to MacDonald Hall. And so powerful plan his attachment to her who inspired it, that after a few more private interviews, Sophia and I experienced the satisfaction of seeing them depart for Brenda Green, which they choose for the celebration of their nuptials, in preferences to any other place, although it was at a considerable distance from MacDonald Hall at Laura. Letter the 13th. Laura, in continuation. They had been gone nearly a couple of hours before either MacDonald or Graham had entertained any suspicions of the affair, and they might not even have suspected it but for the following little accident. Sophia's happening one day to open a private drawer in MacDonald's library with one of her own keys, discovered that it was the place where he kept his papers of consequences, and amongst them some bank notes of considerable amount. This discovery she imparted to me, and having agreed together that it would be a proper treatment of so wealthy or rich as MacDonald to deprive him of money, perhaps dishonestly, treatment treatment. Oh, it was determined that the next time we should either of us happen to go that way, we could take one or more of the banknotes from the drawer. This was mad plan we had often successfully put in execution, but alas, on the very day of Janata's escape, as Sophia was majestically removing the fifth banknote from the drawer to her own purse, she was suddenly most interrupted in her employment by the entrance of MacDonald himself in a most abrupt and precipitate manner. Sophia, who thought naturally all winning sweetness could, when occasions demanded it, call forth the dignity of her sex, instantly put on his most forbidding look and, darting an angry forth on the undaunted culprit, demanded in a hot tone of voice wherefore her retirement was, though insulated, broken in, and the unblushing MacDonald, without even endeavoring to exculpate himself from the crime he was charged with, meanly endeavored to reapproach Sophia with ignorable defrauding him of his money. The dignity of Sophia was wounded. Wretch, exclaimed she, hastily replacing the banknote in the drawer. How darest thou to accuse me of an act of which the bare idea makes me blush? The base which was still inconvenienced and continued to upbraid the justly offended Sophia in such obvious language that at length he so greatly provoked the gentle sweetness of the nature as to introduce her to revenge herself on him by informing him Janita's improvement and of the active part we had both taken in the affair. At this period of their cruel, I entered the library and was, as you may imagine, equally offended as Sophia at the ill-grounded accusation of the malevolent and contemptible MacDonald. Base merchant, cried I, how conquered thou thus undauntedly endure the spotless reputation of such pride excellence? Why dost thou not suspect my innocence as soon? Be satisfied, madam, replied he. I do suspect it, and therefore much desire that you will both leave this house in less than half an hour. We shall go willingly, answered Sophia. Our hearts have long detested they and nothing. But our friendship for the daughter could have induced us to remain so long beneath their roof. Your friendship for my daughter has indeed been most powerful, exerted by throwing her into the arms of an unprincipled fortune hunter, replied he. Yes, exclaimed I, amidst very misfortune, it will afford us some consolation to reflect that by this one act of friendship to Janetta, we have implied discharge every obligation that we have received from her father. It must indeed be a most grateful reflection to your exalted minds, said he. As soon as we had packed up our wardrobe and valuable, we left McDonald's Hall, and after having walked about a mile and a half, we stayed down by the side of a clear, limpid stream to refresh our exhausted limbs. The place was situated to meditation. A grove of full ground elms sheltered us from the east, a bed of full ground nestled from the west. Before us ran the Murby Grove, and behind us return ran the turnpike road. We were in a mood of contemplation and in a disposition to enjoy so beautiful a spot. Our mutual silence, which had for some time begun between us, was at length broke by my exclaiming, "What a lovely scene!" Alas, why we are not at work and orchestras here to enjoy its beauties with us. Ah, my beloved Laura, cried Sophia, for pity's sake, forbear recalling to my resemblance the unhappy situation of my husband. Imprisoned husband. Alas, what could I not give to learn the fate of my Augustus, to know if he is still in Newgate or if he is yet hung. But never shall I be able so far to conquer my tender sensibility as to inquire after him. Oh, do not, I beseech you, ever let me again hear you repeat his beloved name. It affects me too deeply. I cannot bear to hear him mention it. Wounds my feelings. Excuse me, my Sophia, for having thus unwilling offended you, replied I, and then changing the conversation. Desired her to admire the noble grandeur of the land, which sheltered us from the eastern zephyr. Alas, my Laura, returned she, avoid so melancholy a subject, I entreat you. Do not again wound my sensibility by observations on those elms. They remind me of Augustus. He was like them, tall, majestic. He possessed that noble grandeur which you admire in them. I was silent, fearful lest I might any more unwillingly distress her by fixing on my other subject of conversation, which might again remind her of distress. Why do you not speak, my Laura? Said she after a short pause. I cannot support this silence. You must not leave me to my own reflections. They never recur to Augustus. What a beautiful sky, said I. How charmingly is the azure varied by those decayed streets of white. Oh, my Do not thus distress me by calling my attention to an object which so cruelly reminds me of my Augusta's blue stained waistcoat strips in white. In pity to your unhappy friend, avoid a subject so distressing. What could I do? The feelings of Sophia were at the time so executing at the and then tenderness he felt for Augustus so poignant that I had not power to start any other topic, justly fearing that it might in some unforeseen manner again overturn all her sensibility by directing her thoughts to her husband. Yet to be silent could be true. She had entreated me to talk. From this dilemma, I was most fortunate, relieved by an accident truly apropos. It was the lucky overturning of a gentleman's on the road which ran murmuring behind us. It was a most fortunate accident as it diverted the attention of Sophia's from the melancholy reflection which she had been before indulging. We instantly quitting our seats and ran to the skewer of those who but a few moments before had been in so elevated a situation as the fashionable high but who were now laid low and struggling in the dust. What an aptly subject for reflecting on the uncertain enjoyments of this world. Would not that and life of Cardinal Wolsey afford a thinking mind? Said I to Sophia as we were agitating to the point of action. She had not time to answer me, for every thought she was now engaged by the horrid spectacle before us. Two gentlemen most elegantly attired but welcoming in their blood was what first struck our eyes. We approached, they were Edward and Augustus. Yes, dearest Marina, they were our husbands. Sophia shrieked and fainted on the ground. I screamed and intentionally ran mad. We remained thus mutually deprived of our senses some minutes and on regaining them were deprived of them again. For an hour and a quarter did we continue in this unfortunate situation, Sophia fainting every moment and I running mad as often. At length, a groan from the helpless Edward, who alone retained any shape of life, restored us to ourselves. Had we indeed before imagined that either of them lived, we should have been more spain of our grief, but as we had supposed when we first beheld them that they were no more, we know that nothing could remain to me done but what we were about. No sooner did we therefore hear my own Edward's groan than postponing our lamentations for the present, we hesitated and to the dear youth and kneeling on each other of them implored him not to die. Laura, said he, fixing his now blinking eyes on him, I fear I have been overdone. I was overjoyed to find him yet sensible. Oh, tell me, Edward, said I. Tell me, I beseech you, before you die. What has befallen you since that unhappy day in which Augustus was arrested and we were frustrated? I will, said he, and instantly fetching a deep sigh, expired. Sophia's immediately sank again into a swoon. My grief was more audible. My voice fluttered, my eyes ashamed, a vacant stare, my face became as pale as that, and my senses were considerably impaired. Talk not to me of pathos, said I, raving in a frantic manner. Give me a violin. I will play to him and soothing him in his melancholy hours. Beware, ye gentle of Cupid's thunderbolts. Avoiding the piercing shafts of Jupiter, look at that grove of first. I see a leg of wooden. They told me Edward was not dead, but they seemed to me they took him for a cucumber. Thus I continued, widely explaining on my Edward's death. For 2 hours did I rave thus madly, and should not then have left off, as I was not in the last fatigue. Had not Sophia, who was just recovered from her swoon, entreated me to consider that night was now approaching, and that the dumps began to fall, and whether she go, said I, to shelter us from either to that white cottage. Replied she, pointing to a neat building which rose up amidst the grove of elms, and which I had not before observed. I agreed, and we intentionally walked to it. We knocked at the door. It was opened by an old woman. On being requested to afford us a night lodging, she informed us that her house was not but small, but that she had only 2 bedrooms, but that, however, we should be welcome to one of them. We were satisfied and followed the good woman into the house, where we were greatly cheered by the sight of a comfortable fire. She was a widow and had only one daughter, who was then just 17, one of the best of ages, but alas, she was very plain, and her name was Bridget. Neither therefore could be accepted from her. She could not be supposed to possess either exalted ideals, delicate feelings, or refined sensibilities. She was nothing more than a more good-tempered, civil, and obliging young woman. As such, we could scarcely dislike her here. She was only an object of contempt. At you, Laura. Letter 14th. Laura in continuation. Arm yourself, my amiable young friend, with all the philosophy you are mistress of, summon up all the fortitude you possess for alas. In the pursuit of the following pages, your sensibility will be most severely tried. Ah, what were the misfortunes I had before explained, and which I have already related to you, to the one I am now going to inform you of. The death of my father and my mother and my husband, thought almost more than my gentle nature could support, were terrifies in comparison to the misfortunes I am now proceeding to relate. The morning after our arrival at the cottage, Sophia's complaint of a violent pain in her delicate limbs, a complaint with a disagreeable headache. She attributed it to a cold cough by her continued faintings in the open air as the dew was falling the evening before. This I feared was but too probably the case, since how could it be otherwise accounted for that I should have escaped the same indisposition, but the supposing that the bodily exertion I had undergone in my repeated fits of frenzy had so effectually circulated and warmed my blood as to make me proof against the chilling dumps of night, whereas Sophia's lying totally inactive on the ground must have been exposed to all their severity. I was most seriously alarmed by her illness, which terrifying me as it may appear to you, a certain instinctive sensibility whispered me would in the end be fatal to her. Alas, my fear were but too fully justified. She grew gradually worse, and I daily become more alarmed for her. At length, she was obliged to confine herself solely to the bed allotted us by our worthy landlady. Her disorder turned to a galling consumption, and in a few days carried her off. Amidst all my lamentations for her and violent you may suppose they were, I yet received some consolations in the reflection of my having paid every attention to her that could be offered in her illness. I had wept over her every day, had bathed her sweet face with my tears, and had passed her fair hands continually in mine. My beloved Dora, said she to me a few hours before she died, take warning from my unhappy and avoid the imprudent conduct which had occasioned it. Beware of fainting fits. True, at the time they may be refreshing and agreeable, yet believe me, they will in the end. It too often repeated and in power seasons prove destructive to your constitution. My faith will teach you this. I die a mystery to my grief for the loss of Augustus. One fatal swan has cost me my life. Be aware of swans, dear Laura. A frenzy fit is not one quarter so punishable. It is an exercise to the body, and it not too violent, as I dare say, conducive to health in its consequences. Run meat as often as you choose, but do not faint. These were the last words she ever addresses to me. I was her dying advice to her afflicted Laura, who has ever most faithfully adored to it, adhered to it. After having attended my lamented friend to her early grave, I immediately, though late at night, left the detested village in which she died and never had expired my husband and Augustus. I had not walked many yards from it before I was overtaken by a stagecoach, in which I intentionally took a place determined to proceed with into Edinburgh. Process it in Edinburgh, where I hope to find some kind pitying friend who would receive and comfort me in my affliction. It was so dark when I entered the coach that I could not distinguish the number of the few travelers. I could only preserve that they were mine. Perceive that they were many. Regardless, however, of anything concerning them, I gave myself up to my own sad reflections. A gently silence prevailed, a silence which was by nothing interrupted but by the loud and repeated snorer of one of the party. What an illiterate warrant must that man be, thought I to myself. What a total want of delicate refinement must he have. We have thus shocked our senses by such a brutal noise. He must, I am certain, be capable of every bad action. There is no crime to beg for such a character. Thus reasoned I within myself, and doubtless such were the reflection of my fellow travelers. Thus, at the length returning day enabled me to behold the unprincipled scoundrel who had so violently disturbed my feelings. It was Sir Edward, the father of my deceased husband. By his side sat Augustus, and on the same seat with me were your mother and Lady Dorothea. Imagine my surprise at finding myself thus seated amongst my old acquaintance. Great as was my astonishment, it was yet increased when, looking out of window, I beheld the husband of Philippa, with Philippa by his side on the coach box, and when on looking behind, I beheld Philander and Gustavus in the basket. Oh, heaven, exclaimed I. Is it possible that I should be unexpectedly be surrounded by many relations and connections? These words reduced the rest of the party, and every eye was directed to the corner in which I sat. Oh, my Isabel, continued I, throwing myself across Lady Dorothea into her arms, received once more to your bosom the unfortunate Laura. Alas, when we last parted in the vale of August, I was in being untied to the best of Edwards. I had then a father and a mother, and had never known misfortunes, but now deprived of every friend but you. What? Interrupted Augusta. Is my brother dead then? Tell us, I entreated you. What is become of him? Yes, cold and insensible, Nath, replied I. That unlucky lass when your brother is no more, and you may now glory in being the heiress of Sir Edward's fortune. Although I had always despised her from the day I had overheard her conversation with my Edward, yet in civility I compiled with hers and Sir Edward's entreaties that I would inform them of the whole Melcanary affair. They were greatly shocked, even the aberrant heart of Sir Edward and the insensible one of Augusta were touched with sorrow by the unhappy tale. At the request of your mother, I related to them every other misfortune which had befallen me since we parted, of the imprisonment of Augustus and the absence of Edward, of our arrival in Scotland, of our unexpected meeting with our grandfather and our cousin, of our visit to Macdonald Hall, of the singular services we performed toward Janetta, of her father's gratitude for it, of his inhuman behavior, and uncountable suspicion and treatment of us in obligating us to leave the house, of our lamentations of the loss of Edward and Augusta, and finally of the melancholy death of my beloved company. Pity and surprise were strongly depicted in our mother's countenance during the whole of my narration. But I am sorry to say that to this internal reproach of her sensibility, the latter infantily predominated. Nay, what lessons may conduct that had certainly been during the whole course of my late misfortunes and adventures. She pretended to find fault with my behavior in many of the situations in which I had been placed, as I was sensible myself that I had always behaved in a manner which reflected honor on my feelings and refinement. I paid little attention to what she said and desired her to satisfy my courtesy by informing me how she come there, instead of wandering my spotless reputation with unjustifiable. As soon as she had compiled with my wishes in this particular and had given me an accurate details of everything that had befallen her since our separation, the particular of which, if you are not already acquainted with, your mother will give you, I replied to Augusta for the same information repeatedly respecting herself, Sir Edward, and Lady Dorothea. She told me that having a considerable taste of the beauties of nature, her curiosity to behold the delightful sense it exhibited, and since in that part of the world had been so much raised by Gilpin's tour of the highlights, that she had prevailed on her fathers to undertake a tour to Scotland and had persuaded Lady Rhoda to accompany them. That they had arrived at Edinburgh a few days before, and from thence had made daily junction into the country around in the stagecoach they were then, and from one of which they were at that time returning. My next enquiries were considering Philippa and her husband, the latter of whom I learned having spent all of her fortunes, had ill courses for subsistence to the talent in which he had always most excellent, namely driving, and that having sold everything which expect their expect their coach, had converted it into a stage, and in order to be removed from any of his famous acquaintance, he had driven it to Antwerp, from whence he went to every other day. Sterling every other day. That Philippa, still retaining her affection for her ungrateful husband, and followed him to Scotland and gently accomplished him in little exertions to Sterling. It has been only thrown a little money into their pocket, continued Augusta, that my father has always travelled in their coach to view the beauties of the country since our arrival in Scotland, for it would certainly have been much more agreeable to us to visit the Highlands in a post hedges than merely to travel from Edinburgh to Stirling, and from Stirling to Edinburgh every other day in a crowded and uncomfortable stage. I perfectly agree with her in her sentiments on the affair, and secretly blamed Sir Edward for thus scarifying his daughter's pressures for the sake of ridiculous old woman whose folly in marrying so young a man ought to be punished. His behavior, however, was entirely of a piece with his gentle character, for what could be expected from a man who possessed not the smallest atom of sensibility, who scarcely knew the meaning of sympathy, and who actually snored at dear Laura. Letter 15th. Laura in continuation. When we arrived at the town where we were to breakfast, I was determined to speak with Lavender and Gustavus, and to that purpose as soon as I left the carriage. I went to the breakfast and tenderly inquired after their health, expressing my fears to the uneasiness of their situation. At first, they seemed rather confused at my appearance, in between no doubt that I might call them to account for the money which our grandfather had left them, and which they had unjustly deprived me of. But finding that I mentioned nothing of that matter, they desired me to step into the breakfast as we might well converse with great ease. Accordingly, I entered, and Vessel, the rest of the party were devouring green tea and buttering toast. We feasted ourselves in a more defined and sentimental manner by a confidential conversation. I informed them of everything which had befallen me during the courses of my life, and at my request they related to me every incident of life. We are thus soon as you already know of the two youngest daughters which Lord St. Clair had by Lorena, an Italian opera girl. Our mothers could neither of them exactly ascertain, and we who were our father thought it is generally believed the Philippa is the son of one Philippa Jones, a bricklayer, and that my father was one Gregory Staves of Edinburgh. This is however of little consequences, For as our mother was certainly never said to either of them, it reflects no dishonor on our blood, which is of a most ancient and unpolluted thing. Bertha, the mother of Leander and Agatha, my own mother, always lived together. They were neither of them very rich. Their unity for kings had originally amounted to 9,000 pounds. But as they had always lived on the principles of it, when we were 15, it was diminished to 900. This 900 they always kept in a drawer in one of the tables with stored in our common sitting parlor for the convenience of having it always at hand. Whether it was from the circumstances of it being easier taken or from a wish of being independent or from an exercise of sensibility for which we were always remarkable, I cannot now determine. But certain it is that when we had reached our 15th year, we took the 9,000 pound and ran away. Having obtained this prize, we were determined to manage it with economy and not be spent it either with folly or extravagance. To this purpose, we therefore divided it into 9 parcels, one of which we devoted to victuals, the second to drink, the third to housekeeping, the fourth to carriage, the fifth the horses, the sixth to servants, the seventh to amusements, the eighth to clothes, and the ninth to silver buckles. Having thus arranging our expenses for 2 months, for we expected to make the 900 pounds last as long. We hastened to London and had the good luck to spend it in 7 weeks and a day, which was 6 days sooner than we had intended. As soon as we had thus happily disencumbered ourselves from the weight of so much money, we began to think of returning to our mother, but accidentally hearing that they were both starved to death, we gave the design and determined to engage ourselves to some strolling company of players, as we had always a turn for the stage. Accordingly, we offered our services to one and were accepted. Our company was indeed rather small, as it consisted only of the manager, his wife, and ourselves, but there were fewer to pay. And the only inconvenience attending it was the scarcity of place, which for want to people to fill the characters we could perform. We did not mind trifles before one of our most admired performance was Macbeth, in which we were truly great. The manager always played Banquo himself, his wife, my lady Macbeth. I did the three witches, and Philpender acted all the rest. To say the truth, this tragedy was not only the best, but the only play that we were performed. And after having acted it all over England and Wales, we come to Scotland to exhibit it over the remainder of Great Britain. We happen to be quartered in that very town where you come and meet your grandfather. We were in the inner yard when his carriage entered, and we were receiving by the arms to whom it belonged, and knowing that Lord St. Clair was our grandfather. We agreed to improve to get something from him by discovering the relationship. You know how well it succeeded. Having obtained that £200, we instantly left the town, leaving our manager and his wife to act Macbeth by, by themselves and took the road to Stirling, where we spent our little fortune with great elect. We are now returning to Edinburgh in order to get some preferment in the acting way, and such, my dear cousin, is our history. I thank the amiable youth for this entertaining narration, and after expressing my wishes for their welfare and happiness, left them in their little habitations and returning to my other friends who impatiently accepted me. My adventures are now drawing to a close, my dearest Marina, at least for the present. When we arrived at Edinburgh, Sir Edward told me that as the widow of his son, he desired I would accept his hands of 400 a year. I gracefully promised that I would, but I could not help observing that the unsympathetic Bonnet offered it more an account of being the widow of Edward than in being the refined and amiable Laura. I looked up my residence in a romantic village in the Highlands of Scotland, where I have ever seen continued, and where I can, uninterrupted by unmeaning visits, indulge in a melancholy solitude. My unnecessary lamentations for the death of my father, my mother, my husband, and my friend. Augusta has been for several years united to Graham, the man of all others most suited to her. She began acquaintance with him during her stay in Scotland. Sir Edward, in hopes of gaining on her, heir to his title and estate, at the same time married Lady Doriada. His wishes have been answered. Philip and Gustavus, after having raised their reputation by their performance in the theatrical line at Edinburgh, removed to Covent Garden, where they still exhibit under the accusation means of Lewis and Quick. Philippa has long paid the debt of natural. Her husband, however, still continues to drive the stagecoach from Edinburgh to the Stirling. Laura endure, my dearest Marina. Laura. End of Love and Friendship by Jane Austen.